In this episode, we're going to talk about what the gurus will not tell you about imposter syndrome. There's a saying I use with my clients: new level, new devil. When a client will go from $0 a month to $5,000 a month in their business, you'd be shocked how quickly it becomes not a big deal. You'd be shocked how quickly that massive success of building a $60,000 a year business becomes completely unimpressive against their new goal of $10,000 a month, right? And once they hit $10,000 a month, they'll be happy for, about 5 minutes, and then they'll have a complete meltdown. And this has happened more times than I can count. I call it the 10K meltdown because they hit $10,000 a month and then they completely melt down over the fact that that is now the standard for being successful. They have to recreate it every single month, which usually doesn't happen. Usually it takes another handful of months to build up to a solid, consistent $10,000 a month. But it doesn't matter what level of your career, what level of success you reach in your business, you're always going to feel like you're an imposter. And this hits particularly hard for those of us with ADHD. Because if you think about how we've lived our lives, we've constantly lived our lives trying to pretend we're just like everyone else. And we do this without even consciously thinking of it. How good are you at appearing to be very attentive in a meeting? How good are you at looking super interested on a Zoom call? I bet you're also pretty good at appearing busy when you have a big project that you're procrastinating doing. We all know that feeling where your boss or someone who has some kind of stake in what you're doing comes by. Oh, are you working on that thing? Yeah, absolutely not going down a Wikipedia wormhole about Henry VIII and his wives. No, never. Not me. There's this great story about the author Neil Gaiman, who, by the way, is one of my favorite writers of all time. He wrote Good Omens, American Gods, The Graveyard Book, so many incredible books. And if you have not checked out Good Omens on Prime, I urge you to. It's so good. If you don't like it, then we can't be friends. I've honestly watched it probably about 85 times. It's just always on in my house. It's just on in the background. It's one of those really familiar stories because we like having that background noise so that we can kind of focus on something but not get distracted. Kind of takes up that extra 20% of attention span that is dangerous, that could lead us try to clean out our closet or go through all of our makeup, and then all of a sudden, we've given ourselves a complete makeover and we've made a mess, and then we don't want to clean it up. Anyway, Neil Gaiman wrote all that. Neil Gaiman, he is an incredibly successful author. He's written bestsellers. A lot of those bestsellers have been turned into movies and TV shows, and he's in high demand. So he tells the story about being invited to this party, and this party has Hollywood elite. It has people who are so successful in their given careers. And he's standing there feeling super awkward because he's thinking, why am I here? Why did they invite me? Here's a famous actor and an incredibly successful award-winning director. And here's this person and that person. They all were just leading in their fields. And he's standing there just kind of nursing his drink, feeling completely out of place. His imposter syndrome had just completely taken over. And he sees someone else, this other guy who also kind of looks out of place. And so they strike up a conversation. This guy also happens to be named Neil. And he's talking to this guy. And the guy at one point says, I don't know why they invited me. I'm not as impressive as everyone else here. And, they start talking about their careers. And it turns out he was talking to Neil Armstrong, who's walked on the fucking moon. And I share this story because I have good news and bad news for you, is that having imposter syndrome will not stop you from being successful. You can be massively successful and still experience imposter syndrome. Most people do. Most people who are successful still experience imposter syndrome. I mean, unless you're a sociopath. So if you feel imposter syndrome, congratulations, you're not a sociopath. But the bad news is that, yes, while we're all looking for a cure for imposter syndrome and that self-doubt, it's never going away. So imposter syndrome happens when you feel like you've been faking it. You feel like people have been fooled into thinking that you're competent, and that at some point, they're going to figure out that you're faking it, that you don't know what you're doing, that you are an imposter. And when you have been legitimately faking it for a very long time, it's really easy to convince yourself that you're doing that here as well. And at the heart of imposter syndrome, we're really talking about confidence and self-esteem and how we've been taught To gauge what our confidence level and our self-esteem level should be is completely broken. It does not work. It's not healthy. And it doesn't actually lead to having people with high self-esteem or high confidence levels. Because what we're trained to do is to look for outside reassurance that we're good, to look for feedback. And I want you to think back to school. What happened when you handed in your homework? You were given like a star or work harder. You had that terrible pain-inducing red pen marks all over it, or you had the blue pen. The blue pen was like what you wanted to see on your paper. The blue pen was like, great job, amazing point. When you walked into the lunchroom at school, how many people invited you to their table? This is another method that we use to gauge what our worth is, to gauge how confident we should be. So I used to do improv classes when I lived in San Francisco, and it was so much fun. If you have a fear of public speaking, that's why I initially did it, go and take improv classes, because what it does, it makes you unafraid of making mistakes, because you're constantly making mistakes because there's no way to prepare. But there was this one exercise they had us do that I think about all the time. We were all given a little card that had a number on it, but we weren't allowed to look and see what our number was. And we had to literally tape it to our forehead and walk around. And based on how everyone else treated us, we gauged what our status was. So if you were a 1, you were basically the scum of the earth. No one wanted to talk to you. If people came to you and treated you with respect, probably meant that you were mid-tier and you had to just walk around like a normal human. If people were reverent to you, if they bowed down to you, that meant you were a 10. That meant you were a king amongst people, an emperor, empress. And it was amazing how accurately people figured out what their own number was based on how everyone else treated them. Like, this was just a game in an improv class, but this is what we do in our normal lives. We look to everyone else to help us gauge, how important am I? How qualified am I? How good am I at what I do? But the problem with the grown-up world is that people around us aren't giving us grades all the time. We don't necessarily have a lunchroom, especially if you work from home, either for yourself or for a company. Sure, my dog wants me to sit with her when I have lunch, but mainly because she wants my lunch. It's not a good gauge of what my self-esteem should be. So if you're a business owner and you have ADHD and your brain has been conditioned to look at the world to tell you what your self-esteem should be, how confident you should be, are you an imposter or not an imposter? You're set up for failure on every front. Bad news, it's not your client's job to tell you how good you are at what you do. It's not their job to give you feedback on every front. When they do amazing, it helps you do more of what you're good at, or it helps you get better at areas where you need to up your game. But if you're waiting for your self-esteem and your confidence to go up based on external feedback, you're never going to have it, because confidence and self-esteem is an inside game. You get to decide what the number is on your own forehead. And how we communicate this is in how we dress. It's in how we carry ourselves. It's in how willing we are to put ourselves out there and take up space and be loud. So what do you do about this? How do you break out of this? I mean, here's the basis of what I work on with my clients to help them break out of the cycle of imposter syndrome where they think they're never good enough, is they have to stop being such a fucking weenie. Seriously. We don't talk about this enough on the Weeniecast, which is totally my fault because it's my podcast and I decide what we talk about. But letting your fears drive your business is not a good strategy. And getting over a fear doesn't happen by thinking about it a lot, right? If you're terrified of spiders, just thinking about spiders a lot is not going to help you get over the fear. You have to expose yourself to it. You have to show yourself, oh, I can be in the same room as a spider and not die. And you have to do it over and over and over and over again until the fear abates. If you're afraid of public speaking, you have to just get up and speak publicly. Now, there are a lot of ways you can do it. You can take improv classes like I did, and then go to Toastmasters and then take like an elite public speaking class. That is absolutely an option. But none of that stuff is going to work if you're not also public speaking and showing yourself, I can get up in front of a group of people and speak to them and make mistakes and make my point and be charming and be awful and not die. You have to just go and do it. In starting a business, you're not going to be able to build up the tolerance to the fear of putting yourself out there until you just put yourself out there. And the cool thing about this is actually, it doesn't really matter if you're good or bad in the beginning. because you're taking up space. You're daring to put something out there, be it a live video, a post, to getting up on stage, speaking at a networking event, whatever. You're daring to be big. You're daring to command the room, to command attention, to be loud. And people pay attention to that. That's when you start getting the feedback loop. That's when you start getting people who want to invite you to their lunch table. That's when you start getting feedback on your homework, the red marks and the blue marks. Do you know how many people create content and put it out in the world and the content doesn't actually say anything? Doesn't have a point. It just sounds kind of smart because you're using big words. There are full-ass politicians who get elected to represent full-ass states and countries that never actually say anything of any substance. They just get up on stage, taking up space, and say it really loudly and say it again and again and again. And they command attention. The most dangerous thing for our world is that we continue to let imbeciles and people who are not qualified to help other people to continue to command attention like this. You and I both know that what you do for your clients is an incredible help. It's something that they desperately need. And if you're too chicken shit to actually get out there and command their attention and make sure that they know that you're here to help them, you're setting them up to fall for whatever bullshit someone else is selling who's not as good as you. Overcoming imposter syndrome is an inside job. The first person who has to give you feedback that you are just fine just the way you are, with all your quirks and faults and strengths and gifts, the feedback that matters the most is you. And the key to this is to stop trying to be the idealized version of yourself, because that person will never exist. It's a perfectionist dream. Perfect doesn't exist. What you have to do is really understand who is your favorite self. And I talked about this in episode 100, how to get in touch with that favorite self. But your favorite self is never going to be perfect because that's not what matters. Your favorite self is the person that you most enjoy being in every moment of the day. You know, your favorite self might not wear stilettos. Your favorite self might wear cool sneakers. Your favorite self might not wear a designer suit jacket. Your favorite self might wear a hot dog costume because it makes them giggle and it proves a business point that you can stop being a weenie. And for folks with ADHD, a big part of this is accepting how your brain works differently from everyone else. Not just accepting it, it's celebrating all the strengths that you have, all the gifts that you have as someone with ADHD. And practicing, you don't have to out yourself right away, but practicing sharing this about yourself and doing so with pride. So in short, if you want to get over imposter syndrome, you just have to stop being a weenie and go for it. And I say that like it's easy. It's not. It's going to be one of the hardest things you ever do. It's going to be a whole ass personal journey. It might require some therapy, some coaching, a whole bunch of support. But I do know one thing, and it's this. You can do this. You have it in you. You wouldn't want to start a business if you didn't have it in you, if this wasn't meant to be the journey that you're supposed to be on. So go do it.